Good morning. Today is Friday, March 21st, 2025. Earlier this week on Monday, I mentioned that for building the Mishkan, the sanctuary, which is the subject of this week's Torah portion of Vayakel, and it's been the last 3 weeks and will be next week also, I mentioned that there were no spare parts. There were no doubles, no extras of anything. And I shared an explanation of why that was. But there was one object, a very important object, in the Mishkan for which there was a double, and from which we can learn a crucial lesson. In last week's Torah portion, the Parsha of Kisisa, we read about the terrible, terrible incident of the Egel Hazav, the golden calf. Moshe had come down from Mount Sinai after 40 days, holding the Luchos, the 2 tablets of stone on which were engraved the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments. And when he saw what the Jewish people had done, and built a golden calf, Moshe smashed those stones. Then, remember, of course, Moshe prayed for forgiveness for the Jewish people. Moshe went back up to the mountain to be with God, and there God had Moshe engrave a second set of Luchos, thereby teaching Moshe and the Jewish people the concept of teshuvah, of repentance, that a person can make a mistake, even a terrible mistake, but there is a way to be forgiven for it. There is a process, which we discussed many times. And Moshe returns to the Jewish people with the second set of Luchos on the day that becomes Yom Kippur, on the day that confirms for us that it is possible to be forgiven for sins, that teshuvah, repentance, works. So Moshe arrives on the 10th day of Tishrei, which becomes Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, with these second Luchos. And when the Mishkan was built, the focal point was the Aron, the Ark. It was the most important. It is the first object that's mentioned in the beginning of this discussion in the Parsha of Truma. Make an ark, because it is the goal of the entire enterprise. Because inside this ark, which was really like a box, inside this ark were the Luchos, the 2 tablets of stone, the second set of tablets. That's why the ark, the Aron, was so important. It's not because of the box, it's because of what was inside, the Luchos. And you may remember we discussed this idea earlier from the Ramban, Nachmanides, that the entire purpose of building a Mishkan, and then later a Beit HaMikdash, a holy temple in Jerusalem, is to take the moment of Sinai, at which God spoke to the Jewish people, the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments. It was the moment of the greatest contact and intimacy between God and the Jewish people. We discussed this partially last night. And so God wanted a way to continue that moment, to concretize that moment, to have it be ongoing. And the purpose of the Mishkan was to build a place where God and the Jewish people would come together. And so this intimacy that was created at the moment of Sinai can continue and be an ongoing process, not just a one-time event. And so therefore, the focal point of the Mishkan was the Aron, the Ark, in which were placed the Luchos, because that was the text that God spoke to the Jewish people at Sinai. And that's what we want to elongate, to concretize, to take forward with us. And we know that the words that were engraved on the second set of Luchos were exactly the same, identical to the words engraved on the first set of Luchos. And so in this way, the moment of revelation is ongoing. I mentioned the second set of Luchos, which is what we had, which is what went into the ark, were identical to the first set, which were broken. Later in the Torah, in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, this narrative is described. At the end of 40 years, God tells Moshe to review with the Jewish people what happened. And the Torah says in Dvarim, Ve'echtov al haluchos es advarim, asher hayu al haluchos harashinim asher shibarta. That there was a second set of tablets of stone, and Moshe engraved the words of the Aseret Dibros, the Ten Commandments, on the second set of stones. Exactly the same words that were engraved on the first set of stones, Asher Shibarta, that you broke, Moshe. So let me ask you a question. What happened to the first set of Luchos that were broken? What happened to the broken pieces? Ve'echtov al haluchos, again the pasuk from Devarim. Let's read it one more time. Ve'echtov al haluchos es advarim asher hayu al haluchos rishim asher shibarta. So Moshe wrote on the second set of tablets the same words that appeared on the first set of tablets that Moshe had broken, v'samtam ba'aron, and they were placed in the ark. Well, what does that mean? Well, the simple meaning, of course, is the second set of Luchos were placed in the ark. God tells Moshe to engrave a second set of Luchos because you broke the first set because of the golden calf. So engrave the second set, and v'samtam ba'aron, and place them in the ark. That's why the ark is the focal point of the Mishkan, because it contains the Luchos, the second set of Luchos. That's a simple way to understand it. But listen, please, to what the Talmud says. The Talmud in Menachos says, V'samtam ba'aron, and you shall place them in the ark, does not refer only to the second set. It refers to the first set also. The broken pieces were also put into the ark. Says the Talmud, Melamed, this verse, V'samtam ba'aram, you shall place them in the ark, comes to teach us, Sheluchos v'shivrei luchos munachim ba'aron, that the second set of Luchos, which were whole, obviously, and the first set, which were broken, which were in pieces, both sets were placed in the ark. Both sets rested in this place of great honor and reverence, and was the focal point of the entire relationship between God and the Jewish people in the Mishkan and later in the Beis HaMikdash. And says the Talmud, we learn a very important lesson from this. Says the Talmud Mikan, from here we learn, the Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar, Sheshachach Talmudo, Machmas Onso, they forget what they learned. They forget their learning. They got sick, or they got old, and they forgot. So now you have a person who does not know Torah learning, but they did know Torah learning earlier in their life. Mikan, from here we learn, she'enogam bo minig bizayon, do not disrespect such a person. If a person has learned Torah and they forgot it, they must still be respected. Just like the first set of Luchos that had tremendous holiness and they're broken. Once they're broken, what are you going to do with them? They still have holiness. Like a person who did lots of mitzvos and good deeds and helped people, and now for some reason they're not able to do so. But they still have the holiness of the deeds that they did earlier. V'samtam ba'aron, place the broken pieces of the Luchos in the ark together with the second set. And therefore, we learn from here a very important lesson, very practical, especially in our society today, that we do not discard, we do not deride or ignore a person who is old and sick because they can no longer learn Torah, because they no longer know Torah, because they can no longer do all the mitzvahs they wanted to do. They can no longer help all the people that they used to help. And this is a really important issue, because how we treat those who are elderly, those who are past their times of, in quotation marks, usefulness, in quotation marks. It is a critical philosophical issue for every single society. And you can evaluate a society by how they treat those who are older. How we treat the elderly is a referendum on us, the members of society. And that is true individually for each one of us, and it's true collectively as a society. Why is that the case? So the Talmud elsewhere explains, the Talmud in Kedushin explains, HaTorah mishamraso mikol ra benaruso, a person who learns Torah, a person who observes the Torah, who does mitzvos, that Torah protects a person while they are young. V'nosenes lo achris v'sikva beziknuso, and it gives them meaning and hope and significance even in their older age, because they have come into contact with holiness. They've come into contact with God. That's what creates sanctity, Kedusha. And a connection with God is eternal. It doesn't wane just because the person is no longer able to do that. A connection is eternal. We see this even in the case of objects. Holy objects, a siddur, a prayer book. And it's worn out. It can't be used anymore. If it's worn out, it can't be used anymore. Why should it be treated in any special way? It's not usable anymore. The answer is because at an earlier time it was usable for a holy purpose, and so the holiness is intrinsic to the object. It doesn't go away. And so therefore we have to be careful not to mistreat it, and we have a practice of shemos where we bury these kinds of objects like a Torah scroll or Jewish books or other holy objects. We treat it the way we would treat a person, with respect and honor. Because once there is contact with holiness, it's eternal, it doesn't go away. Luchos v'shivrei luchos munachim ba'aron. The second set of luchos, obviously, but even the first set, the broken pieces, are put into the ark. Those broken pieces of the first Luchos, they are very, very important to us, even though they're in pieces, but they remind us of such an important lesson. They remind us of our past mistakes. They remind us of the terrible sin of the golden calf. That's why they're broken. But they also remind us of our ability to ask for and to receive forgiveness from God for even terrible sins. They remind us that every single one of us has the opportunity to start over again and to make better choices and not to be hampered or handicapped because of the bad choices we've made in the past. That's a tremendously important lesson that the broken pieces are teaching us now. That we went through one of the worst events in our history, building a golden calf, and not only did we survive it, we became stronger as a result of it. That's what the broken pieces remind us. It's in this context, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav says, if you believe that you can destroy, believe also that you can repair. And it doesn't only apply to things or people who are old. It applies to brokenness in ourselves at any time of life. In the Torah, there's a lot of failure, a lot of weakness of individuals. Moshe's lifelong dream to enter Israel, he does not achieve it. In our own lives, it is inevitable, as Jews in terms of Jewish law, that some of us don't always live up to what we think we should be doing. Some of us don't always live up to how we think we should be acting as a spouse, as a parent, as a child. Perhaps in our professions, we may think that we don't always live up to what our responsibilities are, what our obligations are. There's lots of brokenness inside every one of us. And what we learn from this detail is that it is possible and therefore obligatory to take our broken pieces and to include them, to use them, to learn from them, and to honor them for what they stand for and for what they teach us. Just like the broken Luchos, we honor them because of what they stand for and for what they teach us. And that's why this is the only object in the Mishkan for which there was a double. Luchos v'shivrei luchos. Munachim ba'aron, the second set of luchos, which were perfect, and the first set, which were broken. They are both placed in a place of honor and reverence and the center of our focal point in serving God in the Holy Ark. My friends, I wish you a beautiful day and a great Shabbos, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.